In this video, I'm going to show you how you can import data in the tables that you've already created in your database. In this example, I'm going to import a sample data set to the table student that we just created in our database. Before importing the data, it's always a good idea to open your data file in a good text editor like Notepad++. I do not recommend Windows Notepad or Excel because they are not good programs to display all the special characters or specifics of your files. You can give your file a thorough inspection and make sure about several important factors. The first thing is that you need to have the same number of columns as your table in your data file. For example, I have 4 columns in my table: student ID, first name, last name, and email in my table, which means that I need to have exactly 4 columns in my data file. Also, you need to make sure that the data types that you have defined for your table in your database are compatible with the data that you have in your data file. For example, for student ID, I used integer data type, which means that I cannot have any characters or letters in the student column. The same goes for first name, last name, and email. Also, your data file needs to satisfy all the constraints defined for each of the columns. For example, if I have student IDs that are not unique or duplicated, that's going to result in an error during the import process. The same goes for the number of characters in the first name, last name columns or email. A CSV data file is basically a text file, meaning that it's basically filled with text characters. CSV stands for comma separated values, which means that in each row in our data file we have values which are associated with each column in our table. And to separate these pieces of data, there is a separator or delimiter character, which is, in case of CSV files, is usually commas. You can have CSV files or text files with different delimiter characters such as spaces or pipes or semicolons. Another important note is that the first column, if the first row in your file is used to define the column names in your file, you have a header row. It is very important because the header row is not data, which means that you don't want to import the values on the first row in your table. This is just a header, and you need to configure it so that the header is thrown away and it's not imported in our table. Another important thing to check is that the names used on the header on your CSV file does not have to be the same as the column names in your data file. You can see that for student ID, I have std_id here. However, in my data file, I have student_id. This is perfectly fine. However, the order by which the columns are listed in my table should be the same as the order by which the columns in my data file are stored. So after performing all these inspections and checks, we can move on to our database or our table to import the data. In order to import the data, you can expand your database, go to schemas, public, tables, and select the table you want to import the data in. Before importing the data, make sure that in the File menu under preferences, the setting for binary paths in the paths section is configured. This is what you should see when you click on binary paths setting in preferences /usr/bin for PostgreSQL binary path. If you don't have this, your import wizard will not run and you will get an error message. So before importing, make sure that the setting is done. This is a one-time setting, so if you set it once and save it, you'll not have to deal with it in future. The next step is to click on your table, right-click on your table, and then click on Import Export. Another way to import data or use or open the Import Export tool is to select your table, go to the Tools menu, and click on Import Export option here, which opens the import tool. The first step is to set the mode for the Import Export tool, because this tool is also used for exporting data. Make sure that this is set to import. The next step would be uploading our file. To upload your file, you need to click on the button next to the file name box, then click on the Upload File button, and then you can either drag and drop your file here or double click here, which opens the file selection box, and then you can select your data file. In my case, the sample file I'm using is named 1000records.csv, and click Open. Uploading the file on the database server might take a while depending on the size of your file and the speed of the network you are connected to. Once your file is uploaded, and you can see the progress bar here, once it reaches 100%, you can close the upload page by clicking on the cross here, and then you'll be able to select your file. Every time you are adding a new file, you have to go ahead and upload your file onto the server first, and then you'll be able to see it here and select it. Once you select your file, or before you click on the select button, you need to select the format. In this case, we are using a CSV file or comma separated values. Click select, and then we need to specify or configure other settings. The next setting is the format, which is already set to CSV. The other important setting is the header, which is by default set to no. Since we have a header row in here, which needs to be ignored and not imported into the database, you need to set the header to yes. If you do not set the header to yes, you will definitely get an error, because the value for student ID, the values for student ID must be integers, and on the first row we have non-integer values for the student ID. So this is very important. The other important setting is the delimiter, in which is comma in our case, and you can determine that by just looking at the file or opening your data file in a text editor and just see what kind of delimiter is used in this file. In our case, comma is the delimiter. You can also read about the other settings such as quote and escape characters. In our case, in our example, they do not matter, but in some cases they might be important. The rest of the settings are located in the Columns tab. In the Columns tab, you can configure the columns from your table to which you are importing the data. So for example, if your data file does not have the same columns or the values for all of the columns in your table, you can cross them out, or you can close on the cross icons on each of the column names and remove them. However, since our data file has values for all of the 4 columns in our table, we can keep them all in here. There are also settings for null strings and not null columns, which you can read and learn what they mean. After making sure all of the settings are correctly configured, you can click OK. After the import completes, you'll see a report in here. I intentionally included some errors in my data file so that you can see what happens if you have problems in your data file. You can see that the error, the import process failed, and you can see failed exit code 1. Once this happens, the only way to find the errors and fix them is to click on more details. There is no other way. Once you click on more details, you can see very specific details about the errors and what caused the errors in your data file in this dialog box. You can see that in my file, line 10, on column student ID, I have a value which violates the data type I have defined for the student ID. The value that caused the problem is 330.816A. And you can tell that A is not a number, it's a numeric, it's a letter, and that caused the issue. So to fix this error, I need to go ahead and look at line number 10 and remove the character A, save my file, and try again. This perfectly shows the value of a good text editor in the process of importing data files. If you don't have a good text editor that doesn't show you the line numbers or is not able to show you all the values and columns in your data file, then you'll have a hard time finding or troubleshooting your files during the import process. I have to try all the steps again, upload my file again in order to import, or try the import data process again. So I'm going to set it to import, go to upload. I need to upload my file again because my file has been modified. So I'm going to select my file again, upload it, then go back here, refresh, select my file, redo all these settings, the delimiter and columns, everything are okay. Then I get another error which I intentionally created. Click on more details, and this time you can see I have another problem in my data file. The error is duplicate key value violates unique constraints for student primary key. This means that I have a duplicated value for student ID, and the violating value is on line 18 in my data file, and the violating key is 252938. Let's go back to my data file and see what the problem is. So you can see on line 18 I have a student ID which happens to be the same as the one I have on line 14. So there are multiple ways to fix this. I'm going to remove this row or line 18 data to get rid of this problem and save my data file and repeat all the steps again to import my data in order to see if the error has been resolved or not. So I'm going to go ahead and upload the file again because I modified the file. I need to re-upload it. Then refresh here, select the file, header to yes, delimiter to comma, okay, and I get another failure or error here. Going to details, it says on line 18 the column last name, which has this value, has a problem, and the problem is value too long for type character varying 50, which means that I have more than 50 characters for this value. So in order to fix this error, I need to go to line 18 and look at the column last name and remove all the extra characters that I added here to create this error. Also be careful not to delete the values that are related to the other columns. Again, save this file, go back here, and repeat the import process. Again, upload the file, refresh, select header to yes, delimiter to comma, OK. And this time it seems like the process has successfully completed. So this is the message you should see after a successful import. To make sure that the data has actually made it to your database, you can open the query tool and write a very simple select query, select asterisk from student. And you can always, it's always a good idea to limit the number of columns in the output to something like 20, and then run your query. Again, be careful when you're spelling the names. And this shows that we've actually imported our data in our table.